Welcome to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. I'm your host, Fabian motherfucking Ojeda, and I don't know shit, but that's okay. All right, let's get this shit started. Thank you everybody for listening to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. Hope you all enjoyed episode number 43 with our OnlyFans model, Victoria. Let me say her last name right this time. Dubois, I believe. Definitely an interesting episode there. I learned a lot, and we have a brand new guest today. And I think, having heard that you're going up against an episode where you're following an OnlyFans model, Mr. Jeff Dwoskin. How do you feel about that?
I feel good. I feel like you're trying to create a theme of hard to pronounce D names.
Yeah. I'm getting really. I'm trying to get better at this. So Jeff Dwoskin.
Yep.
All right, we're getting there. So Jeff, thank you for joining us, man. I know you do your own show too. It's called Live from Detroit, the Jeff Dwoskin Show.
That's right. I do. Yeah, it's a pop culture interview show. I've been a stand-up comedian for over 18 years and finally took the plunge into podcasting, once COVID hit and had all that extra free time. So
yeah,
having a good time with it, as I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that the only reason I started a podcast was because of COVID, so it's a podcast born of a disease.
Well, at least something good came out of it, right? So you got to meet an OnlyFans model, and then I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a picture of my feet if you want. Yeah, I'm happy to.
I mean, we'll negotiate there. See if anybody's interested in that. I'm sure there's somebody out there, right? Pay a few bucks for that. But I wanted to get into your show because you have it pretty streamlined on your website. That your show's about comedy, interviews, social media, and pop culture. That's right up my alley. I love talking about those things. As far as the comedy goes, right? That's something you did before the podcast.
Yeah, I've been a stand-up comedian for 18 years. 19 years, I guess. If you don't count this past year.
That's a long time, yeah.
Yeah, I started doing stand-up comedy just before my second child was born. I remember distinctly I was having a show. I took a writing class at a comedy club, Mark Ridley's Comedy Club. And the presentation, where I got to do my 7 minutes that I had spent, 2 months writing, was right around the time my daughter was supposed to be born. And so I told my wife, I go, do not go early. Do not go early. I did not want to miss the comedy show. And so that does sort of define many of the years and weeks in terms of the amount of time I spent doing stand-up comedy. It's interesting because all the time stand-up comedy is interesting in the sense that you get to work with really big names really early in your career. And so it's been great now with the podcast because of Facebook, staying connected with everyone, maybe not talking to them all the time, but you're connected. So I was able to reach out to a lot of them, and I continue to do so. And, they've been gracious enough to let me interview them on my podcast. So that's sort of one of the places that I kind of tapped into, which was nice. So, but yeah. So yeah, I love all those things. We can talk about any one of those comedy, pop culture trends.
For sure.
Pick one and we'll go down that thread, my friend.
Now, if you don't mind, who are some of the big time comedians that you worked with early on in your comedy career?
Early on, I worked with George Wallace. I've worked with Kevin Pollak, Bobby Collins, Jackie the Joke Man from Howard Stern, Bobby Kelly, Tim Allen, Kathleen Madigan.
Wow.
So, there's been a good amount of good names that I was fortunate enough to cross paths with, and a good amount of them still in contact with, at least through the social medias.
And I have a friend from high school, he started doing comedy. I actually interviewed him for the podcast a few months ago. And same thing, you know, he started working with a lot of like the Latino comedians, you know, and the big names too. And it's kind of interesting to see that because you don't really see that like in music too much, you know. I played in a few bands, and you know, we didn't start playing with Metallica, you know, early on in our little career there. But you see that with comedy, right? What do you think that is? Is it such a tight knit community, or what's going on with that?
You know, it's interesting, and I've thought about it. I don't know the actual answer, but I do think it's because the way comedy is structured when you're doing a show, I'm familiar. I come from the 3-person format where there's an MC and then a feature and a headliner. So the MC does 10 minutes. Say I'm just making it can vary, but then the feature does say 20, and then the headliner does 45 an hour, whatever a headliner would do. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of that type of format, and this is mostly in the United States, Canada does a little different, but in the United States, the MC goes out and it's his job to take the bullet, meaning it's a cold audience and you just kind of get them used to the idea of hearing comedy. If you do pretty good, great. But pretty good is good for an MC, right? Because you're going in cold. The feature is always known as like the sweet spot because the MC just teed them up. And then the feature goes out, does 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe, and it's a warm audience. And they're at the height of being able to pay attention and not worry yet about babysitters, getting home to babysitters and all that kind of stuff. So that's like a beautiful spot. And that's where I've spent most of my career, you know. And then the headliner comes out and the room is warm and they come out and they just do their thing for 45 an hour, whatever it is. So I think with that type of structure, where the first person is, and I don't mean this literally, a throw them to the wolves type thing, you're not going to necessarily get somebody in a local town where these headliners go town to town to town to town. They'll get somebody who can just get the job done and get and not get in the way. And so that then becomes the opportunity, I think, for the newer comedian, because you know they get to kind of cut their teeth on this while still getting to kind of rub elbows with a big name comedian. So
yeah,
kind of cool.
Pretty cool little formula there. Yeah. Where have you have you toured, or you just do like local shows, or where are you from actually?
I'm from Michigan. And so I spent most of the time around Michigan and Canada, Ohio, Indiana, most of the time just in that area. I started comedy later, so I had a family and a job, and so I never made the full break to full time. I did it enough that if someone were to look, it wasn't just a hobby. It was definitely, you know, something I put a lot of time into, but you know, never was afforded the opportunity to move to LA or New York or something like that. So,
now when it comes to, you know, actually like being funny, and that's your personality, and then turning it on the stage, do you ever get that from people? Like, because my friend that I talked to, his name Johnny Roque, you know, I knew him. I'm like, dude's not funny. Like, I've never heard him crack a joke, right? But when he's on stage, he turns it up and you know, he does his thing and his routine's really good. You know, are you kind of in that boat where your personality on and off the stage is like two different people, or are you the funny guy in the conversation and everyday life too?
It's an interesting question because I've had this kind of conversation with folks, and it's like it's a slightly different answer every time, because so when you're on stage, like this is how I describe myself on stage. My brother used to come to the shows and he would say, "Wow, you're really good." He goes, "That's on stage. Jeff is quite a interesting person. I'd really like to be friends with on stage Jeff." You know what I mean? And so, because when I'm off stage, I'm funny, but in a different way, meaning when you're on stage, it's just you, right? So it's your job to be entertainment for the 100, 200,000 people in the room. That's your job. That's why you're there. You know what I mean? So you're on this stage, you have the microphone, you've got to become the person that you just described your friend becomes when he's on stage, because it's do or die. You have to entertain these people. That's why you're there. When I'm at a party or something like that, it's a mix of people and you're with your friends. It's not my personality to try to be the center of attention in a group setting where it's a natural group setting. I'll try and slip in my jokes and be funny and in my part of the conversation try and be entertaining, but I don't see that as like, all right, everyone part ways, I'm taking over now. So in sense, when I'm with people, I only shoulder the portion of the conversation that I need to shoulder and let everyone else do it also. And I think in my head, I think that's the appropriate thing to do. I mean, it's, everyone has their night, right? When you're with your friends and it's like your night, like you were on fire that night, but just because naturally you just kind of rose above, right? And other nights it's another friend that does it and you enjoy that. Sometimes you want to enjoy the time you're there and not just be the source of enjoyment for the people in the room. So, I'm very cognizant of that. And when I'm with people, I can enjoy just being one of the crowd and not the person who is responsible for entertaining everyone. When I do my podcast, then I'm on stage Jeff. I mean, I'm not on stage, but that's sort of the mentality that I kind of bring when I'm doing that. It's, because then that's the role of, it's my responsibility as the host to be the host. So, in that sense, then, then I'll be that person. Or if I'm playing that role or, talking to you or something like that, I'll just try to be somewhere in between.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. You got to know when to turn it on and off and when it's appropriate. So yeah, definitely good answer there. Are you looking at all to get back into comedy once, this whole COVID mess is done with, or is it kind of like you've hung up the gloves for that?
No, that's a great question. Originally I was like, oh, I love the podcast. I could just do the podcast. And then you do the podcast and you start getting obsessed with numbers and downloads and listens. Then it occurred to me, well, if I go back on stage, I can promote the podcast.
Yep.
I would love to get back on stage because there's really nothing like being on stage. But I think it has to be after vaccinations and all that kind of stuff. So I think I'm half a year or so away from that. I started a live show on Wednesdays with some friends of mine and some comedy friends of mine where we call Crossing the Streams and we go live. So it's not taped. We just go live and then it lives however it happened during that hour. And we just talk about TV shows that we like watching. It was an offshoot of my podcast. With a couple of friends of mine, Ron Lippitt and Howard Rosner, we had done a couple episodes of my podcast early on where we just talked about shows that we were streaming. And so when I was thinking of doing a live show, I was like, oh, we should do that. And then I invited a couple other folks and then we have guests as well. And so we just talk about stuff that you can stream. And, because everyone always, it's a typical conversation. And it's interesting because when you get a group together, people are always streaming different things or they like different things or they'll recommend different shows.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So, but it's really just kind of a way just to be live and in the moment versus the podcast, which is taped and edited. And, I make sure it's the best version of that can be while sounding off the cuff as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I've not thought of going live just because I am a little nitpicky, not that I'm so worried about like, oh, we said something wrong, but, I want to make sure that, the sound is good, that there's not too many, like those pregnant pauses in between responses and whatnot. If somebody's just kind of like going on and on and on and on, I want to make sure to edit it so that it's not completely unlistenable, But
no, we have all the same Michigas and like and so like I feel I understand exactly what you're saying. So when I do the live show, one, I do it with a bunch of people. So there's always somebody has something to say. And then it's structured in the sense that everyone gets their piece. So everyone's like talking about it. Everyone has a show and everyone knows the order they go in. And we end we end no later than 59 minutes. We don't go
Mm.
longer than 59 minutes. Why that magic number? Because then I can upload it to Instagram television. Instagram
Uh,
television has to be less than 60 minutes.
okay.
That way I literally don't have to do any editing. And
Hmm.
so once we went 0.04 over, and I had to go in and edit it and then resave the whole file. Pain in
Oh
the butt.
man.
Anyway, no, not a big deal. Whoa, woe is me, right? No, but but that way it plays to what you're saying. So it's kind of structured because I have the same thoughts as you do, and so it's structured. So I go, all right, Bob, it's your turn, and he does his show. We fill it in, and the second it starts to lull, all right, Howard, it's your turn. And so
Hmm.
and just move it around, move it along. So it's not like an open conversation with folks. It's not like doing my podcast. It's a very specific kind of format and an approach to keep it within that hour and to keep it moving too.
Hmm.
And that information, it doesn't rattle on.
Yeah. Now, moving on to podcasting, and I guess it could kind of tie into comedy too, because do you feel like these days you kind of have to watch what you say? I mean, do you feel free, like, being as funny as possible without trying to offend people, kind of thing? Do you care? I mean, because I kind of sometimes, I do bite my tongue a little bit because I have a very specific sense of humor, but I do think about it too. I'm like, damn, you could look these up, and I don't want to, say the wrong thing and have somebody take a sound clip, like, out of context or whatnot. I mean, I do push it sometimes, but it is in the back of my mind. Like, should I have said that? So does that cross your mind when you're doing a podcast?
I think it has to. I mean, with the culture today, the cancel culture today,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they'll go back to things, from way back when. Certain things are never excusable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certain things you can never say, but and then certain things are said, 20, 30 years ago out of ignorance because at the time it seemed okay to say it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know better,
Right.
and maybe you've hopefully learned since. Those type of reach backs I think are a bit much, but I mean, I do think that again, it all depends on what it is. So yeah, I think you have to kind of be careful what you say. Not even kinda. You have to be careful what you say.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was just somebody yesterday there was a racial slur and a country singer, I think, and they got rightfully, reprimanded and stuff like that. So it's like anytime you go, I think people think if they're on a podcast, it's like a free pass or
Mm-hmm.
something. It's like, no. I've edited stuff out that people have said by accident, you know what I mean? That maybe they didn't realize that it could have been insensitive. And so
Right.
I take it out because I don't want them to get in trouble for anyone to get in trouble for being on my show. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really go into, stuff on my show where I think I would get in trouble that way. You know what I mean? There was one thing in one episode I think I was talking about where I referenced something specific from my childhood and kind of made a joke about it because but I don't think it was that big a deal, or I
Mm-hmm.
hope it wasn't. And, so that kind of thing. But yeah, I just think everyone's got to be careful these days. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to be sensitive. I mean, it's good though. The good side to it is we're all kind of opening our eyes to our differences and the things that make us the same and being able to embrace those and understand how something means something to another person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm white, but I'm also Jewish. And when people say things that are Jewish related, somebody who's not Jewish might not be able to relate, but it might hit me differently. And everyone's got their background and their point of view and, and their frame of mind. And, so yeah, I mean, I think understanding how we all need to live together is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I mean, but it's also, I think, I think it's still okay. Like, I'm Hispanic, so if I make a joke about Mexican people or something like that, I have a little bit more authority to do so, right? But if I were to, if I were to make a joke about, Jewish people, then it wouldn't be appropriate. you know?
Right, right. Well, I make jokes about being Jewish, and that's okay, and I think that's okay. And if you can make Hispanic jokes, you know what I mean? But I can't make Hispanic jokes, you know what I mean? And like, so it's like, so yeah, I think if you own it and you are it, I think you have some liberties to be able to reference it and discuss it. You know what I mean? I'm a lot,
Yeah.
I believe that. I think it's when you start to cross into other ethnic
Kind of when it
backgrounds
becomes
and
like hate, right? When it becomes like you don't know if there's like if you're actually joking or not, right?
well, right, but then sometimes you don't know if what you're saying is insensitive. Sometimes it's not, I mean,
Mm.
look, sometimes you heard something your whole life, and maybe you didn't know that that was being mean. You know what I mean? And so you learn, at some point, and but so that's why if you stick to your own thing, you know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
I'm Jewish. I'm not going outside of the Jewish jokes, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I think if we're joking together and we say something, if I made a joke and you made a joke on top of it, I think that's okay. If we're playing
Yeah.
with each other. And so, that kind of thing. So, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, a tricky little line to straddle there. You do interviews on your podcast, right? Who are some of the more interesting people you've had on? I think you have this last episode. You had a pretty interesting guest, right?
yeah, the last episode was Candy Clark. She was from American Graffiti and The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was a movie she starred in with David Bowie. American Graffiti is sort of one of the AFI's top 100 films. It was one of the non-Star Wars films directed by George Lucas. So, or one of the non-Star Wars films that George Lucas made. So, and it's considered, one of the best 100 films ever. And she was, one of the starring roles in it. So it was interesting hearing the stories, talking, she talked a bit about Richard Dreyfuss and Ron Howard and Cindy Williams and George Lucas and just, filming it and all that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting because it's a whole different time, where, and it was, it was very, I mean, I find everyone interesting I talk to. It's always hard to say who is the most interesting, or because
Right.
everyone kind of brings out, something, really different. And depending on, like when I was talking to Horace H.P. Sanders, he won Star Search. If I didn't know him, that would have been the cool thing. But I've known him. We've been good friends for a long, long time. So when you listen, you can kind of hear that, I hope. There's a different, we're laughing differently. I mean, it's like it's a good time, and we're catching up and sharing stories. Scott Schwartz was fascinating, hearing about his relationship with Richard Pryor. There's just so much. Liz Priestley actually was a great interview, and so she's got this movie coming out, Concrete Cowboy, on Netflix. It should be out pretty soon. But like, I didn't pick it up, and when I was discussing, or when I was doing background, when I was researching, her background and all the stuff she's done. But the background and history of the word cowboys was very interesting, and she shed a lot of light on that. I'm not going to say what it was because I want everyone to go listen.
Right.
But that was really interesting. Kelly Maroney, Billy Van Zant, Carl Gottlieb. There's just so many cool people. And then it's fun, like when I get to talk to people like Dave Landau, who I've been friends with for decades, they're doing pretty cool stuff now. And so that's always exciting to kind of catch up with someone like that. Early on I talked to Dave Mirage. Sorry, I can't saying you're too fast. He's on Raimi on Hulu. And so that's but we used to do
show. I like that.
We used to do open mics. He plays for his friend, Raimi's friend, the doctor. And we did open mics together starting comedy. So that was fun to catch up with him. That's what's nice about the podcast is being able to reach out to people, and you have an excuse to have a conversation with them where normally they wouldn't talk to you.
Yeah.
But
and that's something that I've found interesting. I haven't really have any like big name interviews or anything like that, but everybody's like got a story to tell, and I love that aspect of it because I've had more good conversations in the last like 6-7 months than I've ever had, and I'm learning a lot from a lot of different people. That's kind of like the added benefit of me hosting the podcast. I never thought I'd have some of these conversations before. Who's somebody that, if you had your pick, of anybody to interview, who would you really want to interview?
I think Steve Martin would be fascinating to interview. I'd probably be intimidated, but Steve Martin, I think, would be pretty cool. I'd like to talk to Henry Winkler, but and Steven Spielberg.
Nice.
Steven Spielberg would be another one too. But those are the maybe in 20 years they'll talk to me.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I mean, hopefully, we see some. Hopefully, people tune in and listen to some of these guests, because I mean, it seems like some of them, they have the, connections to people that they've worked with in movies and TV and stuff, and it should be interesting to hear some of those stories.
Yeah, it's really cool. I will say my favorite moment, if I have a favorite moment. I've loved talking to all these folks, but like one of my favorite moments was when I was talking to Hal Sparks, and Hal Sparks was in Dude, Where's My Car? So he was Zoltan, and that, and I didn't tell him I was going to do this. I introduced him not as Hal Sparks. I introduced him as the character from Dude, Where's My Car? I did a whole introduction as if I was introducing the cult leader Zoltan, and I didn't tell him. And he just went with it. Nice. Like when you listen to it, there's no editing, there's no pre-prep. That was a genuine, just off the cuff, improv reaction where he just went into a monologue as that character based on me doing that. And to me, like that was one of my favorite times, because I've done something similar to that with other folks, but it never went exactly like that. And so that to me, it was like, and I listened to it and I was like, no one's going to know this is what happened. You know what I mean? They'll just think I told them I was going to do it. But like, no, so that's why I mentioned it. But yeah, so cool. That was cool. That to me was like, it was a cool organic moment that really just kind of worked out nice.
Yeah. That'd be like, if you try to interview, like, I don't know, somebody like from 90s TV, like, I don't know, like David Faustino, and all of a sudden, you get him to break into the Bud Bundy character. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I see that you were a winner in a top podcast. It's like what is that, like? What is that? It says winner in top 25 indie podcasts from 2020.
Oh, in Indie Pods United had a pretty cool podcast summit, and then they picked 25 of their top 25 independent podcasts as the top 25 independent podcasts of 2020, of which I was honored to be one of those 25.
Nice.
There you go.
Is that is it do that every year, or how does that work?
I think the next one's like in June. Ping me after. I'll make sure you have the information.
Cool. Yeah, be interested to check that out. Now, the other, one of the other big, topics. I'm glad you have it. I love how you have it like a checklist on your website there. Social media, right? Is that something you talk about on your podcast, or are you just more like in tune with social media and promotion, or what do you what would you have to say about social media?
So originally in 2017, here's a lesson in procrastination. I was originally going to start a podcast, and it was going to be only social media focused because I'm really into Twitter. I'm very focused on Twitter. I have a Twitter company called #Roundup, and that is it's a game. It's for anyone can do it. It's a great kind of place. You can go to #Roundup on Twitter at #Roundup. We have an app as well. It's free that I developed, and we play hashtag games all day, every day. And it's a great way to kind of become part of a community on Twitter and really kind of build up your following on Twitter. I was going to do a podcast based on social media, bought everything. It was going to be called Viral Intentions because it was the idea of it was going to be how do you go viral and all that kind of good stuff. And it was a kind of a play on the movie Cruel Intentions, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really clever. Had everything made, intro, outro, everything. And then just kind of got lazy. And so when COVID hit and I pulled everything out of the box, and then now it's March 2020 and I'm going to do the podcast. I said, I'm going to do a podcast now. And so it was like, as the pandemic was in full swing, doing a podcast called Viral Intentions just didn't seem like the right thing to do. It seemed like my moment had passed. So, so I ended up renaming it the Jeff Dwoskin Show, which then I renamed to Live from Detroit, the Jeff Dwoskin Show. So it was kind of have more of a variety feel tone to it. But the social media at the beginning of every episode, I do a social media tip. And so it's just a real quick tip. And the idea is that I make people more aware of things that are out there that they can take advantage of. And then they can go and Google how to do it. Like today, the episode that comes out tomorrow, I talk about this new newsletter feature that's on Twitter. You know, so I only talk about it for like 45 seconds. So it's or a minute, you know, so, but it's enough that you know it's there. You can go look for it, you know, and then you can learn about it and you can do it, you know, just enough to be dangerous and then go from there. Cause it's not like a tutorial or anything like that. So it's more just, here's a quick tip and, you know, go figure it out. There's Google and YouTube videos. You don't need me. You just need me to know that it exists, you know, that kind of thing. And so that's how I sort of work in the pop culture stuff. Usually it's Twitter based, but it can be Instagram, TikTok, anything. So it's usually just a little something that I talk about. And then I also, with hashtag Roundup, these are hashtag games that we play. And so like I have a fake facts game that I run every Sunday. So today it was like fake big game facts. And just for an hour, just people use the hashtag and just make up stuff about the Super Bowl. It's a fun thing. You can see where that's fun. Oh, just make up anything about football, players, anything. And so, you know, just it's, you know, be silly, be funny, that kind of thing. And so on my podcast, I, based on whoever the person I'm interviewing or something I talked about on the show, I'll pick a hashtag that we've done from the past and I'll read tweets from it on the show. And then I'll retweet them at Jeff Dwoskin Show, which is the Twitter account for the show. And I'll put them in the show notes. So it's a way to sort of engage the audience and get them interested. And then I could tell them, hey, you were, you know, listen to the show. I read your tweet on the show. And so it's just a way to kind of get people involved and, you know, promote the hashtags, but then also promote my podcast at the same time.
Nice. It's really like it takes a lot of work. It seems it's like kind of like almost like an art, you know, because I am you know, admittedly social media stupid, and I choose to be that way. You know, I have the podcast. It's fun. You know, I'm not, you know, necessarily super ambitious about it where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do great things with it. I'm doing it for fun, you know, just point blank with that. But I, you know, before starting the podcast, and then I also have like a little side barbecue business that kind of started at the same time. You know, before doing those, I wasn't on any social media except for Facebook, you know, and I still wish that I was back on MySpace, you know, and I just really can't get with the times with, you know, Instagram and Twitter, especially Twitter. I hardly use Twitter, you know, but it seems that you need to, if you have any sort of, you know, business or any sort of podcast, any sort of anything, you kind of need those tools, right, to become successful. It's to me, it's growing like a following is really a lot of work, you know, like even just kind of trying to get to that first 1,000, you know, followers on like something like Instagram. Unless you have some sort of formula for that, you know, it's really a lot of work. Do you have any quick tips for people that might want to grow their audience?
Yeah, well, you know, any social media platform to grow your audience, you kind of have to find a community on there and then you kind of grow from there. Because the whole idea of any social platform, regardless of which platform it is, you need people to be interested in what you're doing and you want to be interested in what they're doing. And then generally that's how you follow each other and then you
Mm-hmm.
find other like-minded people. So that's why I started hashtag Roundup, and that's why I found a group of people that liked playing these hashtag games, that were addicted to these hashtag games. And there's other communities, there's people that spent the last 4 years just tweeting negative politics stuff, and they, found a whole community. But I will say, podcasting aside for a second, the barbecue business is, I would say, your focus should be Instagram
Mm-hmm.
and TikTok. And so Instagram and TikTok are huge with food. And so Instagram obviously is more images and all that kind of stuff, but with Reels, you can have some animation or some video. But on TikTok, man, I learned how to create a steak on TikTok. I've learned how to make amazing tabbouleh on TikTok. My wife's made recipes. There's recipe TikTok, there's recipe Instagram, there's recipe Twitter probably. And so, those would be the type of communities that you would find. And then you take pictures of the food, and the food kind of speaks for itself. Then you can repurpose that onto a Facebook page and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make a TikTok, you can put it into Reels on Instagram, that kind of thing. So, but, no joke. I mean, there's so many how to make, barbecue this, barbecue that, the perfect
Mm-hmm.
steak, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, see, like when I call up my thing, it's all women in bikinis and steaks. And sometimes I
Yeah.
have to, and sometimes I'm like, and I click on the steak. I mean, that's where I am in my life, you know what I mean? And so
Uh,
it's like, but that kind of food is big. So I mean, that's a good thing. And then, I mean, honestly, you could do a second podcast, where you're just talking about barbecue and food and all that kind of good stuff to promote it as well. So, but I
yeah.
think, especially if you can make money off of it, if it's a revenue source, I think it'd be interesting to kind of, I mean, that's just real high level, but it'd be interesting to kind of dive into it. There's definitely opportunity there for you.
Yeah. I don't know. Got to look into that. I never thought about TikTok. I mean, I, I thought it was all dance videos and stuff, but that's interesting to know.
The interesting thing about TikTok is it's different to everyone who uses it, because the algorithms are based on who you follow. So if you
Mm-hmm.
follow a bunch of 18-year-old girls dancing, that's all you'll see. If you
Mm-hmm.
follow people who talk about food, then that's what you'll see. And so, there's a lot on TikTok. It just depends, where you start to kind of build your audience. But yeah, and the interesting thing about TikTok is you don't need a large following for a video to blow up. So it's one of those, it almost works reverse like the other ones. You can blow up on TikTok and then get tons of followers from that, versus having to figure out how to get the followers and then um get something to blow up. So,
Yeah.
I only have like, I don't know, I don't even think 200 followers on TikTok. I had one thing get over 10,000 views. Some only get 1,000, but I mean, but percentage wise on Twitter, if I only had 100 followers, I'd never get 1,000 views. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
on TikTok, it's really interesting. So you do something with how to cook, a certain barbecue, and it's really great, and you use the right hashtags, that thing can go
No.
everywhere. So
Yeah, I think you see that with somebody like who's pretty much in pop culture now. Is that dog face guy, the skater cholo guy that drinks
yeah,
cranberry
exactly.
juice.
Exactly. If he went from
I
out of
can't
nowhere.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I can't imagine he had like millions of followers to start with.
No, it was just, that was a good combination of, it was a great video, right? It just was
Mm-hmm.
like, it just sometimes, it just, everything clicks, the literal video, how it's shot, it just resonates. I mean, you can try, but but it's that's kind of the more unicorny type thing. It happens every
Mm-hmm.
now and then, right?
Yeah.
But to that level, but you don't need, I feel like, people, you don't need grand slams. You can hit a lot of doubles and triples and you'll do great.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you'll hit some singles too, so
Yeah.
it's just a matter of staying out there and and just keep doing it. Nobody goes viral just, one shot and they go viral. So it's all good. We can talk
Now,
later.
yeah. Now let's talk pop culture. What are some things you've been talking about? I know you talk about like different shows that you're streaming and whatnot on the live podcast, right? But what are some pop culture things you talk about on your podcast?
Well, the main focus of the pop culture on the podcast is really the interviews. So the interviews really are the pop culture, even though it's 2 check marks on thing. But the pop culture is talking about like American Graffiti with Candy Clark, or the movies that people are doing or anything like that. That's generally where the pop culture part of it comes in. It's those conversations. Most of the people, or a lot of people that I talk to, or people that maybe one day I would have bumped into them at a Comic-Con or something like that, right? And so I always kind of joke, this is my Comic-Con dreams come true, being able to talk to some of these folks, and so that's where the pop culture part comes in, the comedy part comes in, just me being silly and hopefully funny, but then also talking to comedians, and then then the pop culture is sort of that.
Okay.
I rely on my guests for that. But
To pick at some of the things you're streaming, what are some of the shows that you've been streaming lately, or some really good recommendations? I mean, I have pretty much every service, Netflix, Hulu,
sure.
the Peacock.
Yeah. I think some real fun ones are Ted Lasso on Apple Plus. That's a great one to watch. Cobra Kai, of course, is amazing. Yeah. Flight Attendant is supposed to be really good. We talked about The Expanse and Tehran, which is also on Apple Plus. Sometimes we talk about movies like The Social Dilemma on Netflix. I think it's an important movie to watch. We'll talk about movies if it's like something that you have to stream now. You know what I mean? We don't generally, like if a new movie came out, we wouldn't necessarily cover that. But if it's a movie that, like we talked about on a recent episode, Bob Phillips talked about The Great Buck Howard, which is an older movie with John Malkovich. So like we'll talk about old stuff, if you want to stream to, catch a classic type thing. The only time we ever broke that was, I think, maybe with the Christmas episode, because we just were talking about anything Christmas. But I just watched, which we haven't talked about in the show yet, a show on Netflix called Atypical, which I loved, with Michael Rappaport and Jennifer Jason Leigh. It's a great story about a family, and their son is autistic, and it's great. There's 3 seasons. I think there's one more season coming out that it's going to end the series, but I just found that to be a great show. And WandaVision, if you're into the MCU, is amazing. Oh, what's really great right now on Netflix is Lupin. Lupin. That's a great one. It's a French show that they dubbed in English, and that's amazing. That's an amazing show. And Queen's Gambit, of course.
I think it's really interesting how Netflix almost like sets the tone for pop culture stuff. I believe because you saw something like that I never thought would get over, something like Tiger King, and that became such a huge thing. Like everybody was talking about it, right? And then there were a few like next big things in between. Well, you mentioned Cobra Kai, and there's people that I never thought were into like Karate Kid, and all of a sudden they're like the biggest Cobra Kai fans. I wonder what it is, about Netflix, because people are always talking about like, oh, there's nothing on Netflix, or even there was that whole thing about, oh, cancel Netflix. They got like that child, porno thing going on with the cuties or whatever. But I mean, do you feel the same way? Do you think Netflix kind of sets the tone, or what do you think about that?
I do. It's interesting because I think I've been trying to think about that, and then you kind of laid it out in a good way. Is Netflix, when Cobra Kai was on YouTube Red, which is, so Cobra Kai has been around for years, right? Yep. And few people watched it, and nobody who saw it didn't like it, but nobody ran to YouTube Red and watched Cobra Kai.
Right.
Literally within 24 hours, of Netflix taking season 1 and 2 and putting it on, it became the biggest cultural phenomenon in the United States. I mean, there wasn't then, pretty soon, there wasn't anyone who hadn't seen Cobra Kai.
Right.
When you look at that compared to, now Mad About You didn't probably have the rabid fan base that a Karate Kid did, but Mad About You was a big show in the 90s, and they did a reboot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were on some like Spectrum network or something. They did 12 episodes on some network you've never even heard of, Spectrum. Mm. And then they went to Amazon Prime brought them into more of the fold. But my guess is you weren't aware of it till I just said it. Right. So it's like one of those things where Amazon, even The Boys is popular, and it's a great show on Amazon. But for some reason, the things on Amazon don't get to the level of pop culture heights that the things on Netflix get to.
Right.
In Netflix, you can go down the list: Queen's Gambit, Black Mirror. You can just almost anything that, what's the one with the Sandra Bullock with the eyes? Anyway, Bird Box. Right. And then, so it's like, I think Disney Plus actually is more likely to have a pop culture phenomenon now with, The Mandalorian and WandaVision. And I think the Muppets are probably going to fly back in, even though their new Muppets didn't do it, but the old Muppets are coming back, so I think you'll see a resurgence in that. And so it's just interesting. You're right. Netflix right now has kind of the number one spot for launching something into the pop culture zeitgeist. And it maybe it's because more people have Netflix, maybe more people just have it. And not as many people have Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, because it's getting to the point where it's getting ridiculous. How many things can you buy? What I mean? I think I own CBS. I own,
because the whole thing about, cutting the cord, with cable companies and everything was that like, okay, you're going to get exactly what you want. You're going to pay less. Right. But if you subscribe to every single thing that's out there, you're pretty much paying, what you were paying for cable anywhere for satellite, right? Or even more, like I said, I have everything, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, the Peacock, WWE Network, all that stuff, and that's probably, when you add it all up, at least like $100.
Right. And like, I went to cut the cord once, and I think they ended up lowering, AT&T lowered the price. It was within $15 of what I would have assumed I would have had to pay anyway. And I was like, well, for $15, I'm not messing with it. You know what I mean? For $15, I'll just pay extra $15, and like, I'll just keep it as is. And that way I don't lose anything. I think I would have lost AMC at the time, I think. And Walking Dead was important, which,
right.
But yeah, I mean, you can always push back on, like, I just called AT&T and I just got $40 off my bill. You know what I mean? If you called the right time, there's definitely stuff they'll do to keep you. They definitely just charge you in some of these cases. But yeah, streaming it's just crazy how much time we put into it and all that kind of stuff. And but yeah.
Well, we kind of went through the whole the checklist there, Jeff. But I do like to, like I mentioned before we got on, I'd like to keep the interviews, around this time, super short, right? Is there anything else you want to throw out there?
No, I appreciate it. I think we covered some good stuff. I hope everyone checks out my podcast, Live from Detroit, the Jeff Dwoskin Show. You can go to my website, jeffisfunny.com. You can also go to jeffdwoskinshow.com, but the odds are you can spell jeffisfunny.com and it's easier to spell. And so, you can play any episode from my podcast there. There's a player, and then you can jump and subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, anywhere you can get podcasts. So please do that. Feel free to sign up for my mailing list. And and then we have a live show. If you follow me on YouTube at the Jeff Dwoskin Show, or the Jeff Dwoskin Show on YouTube, or on Facebook, you can watch us live every Wednesday, and then we replay it everywhere as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, I mean, I really appreciate you having you on. I did learn, a couple things there as far as like social media goes. So I might, have to probe deeper into that if I, if I expand my ambition on the podcast. Definitely for the barbecue business. So I might have to pick up that whole TikTok thing, but we'll see.
Definitely for your
But
barbecue business. I wouldn't hold back on that. I definitely for real on that.
yeah, I'm gonna look into it. And then maybe I'll do some of those butt dancing videos too, and paired with your feet pictures, we'll put it on the OnlyFans for the listeners.
We'll be rich.
Well, thank you again, Jeff. Again, really appreciate it. For everybody listening at home, appreciate it. Thank you. Fuck you and good night. Subscribe to the Ignorance is Strength podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, and share on Facebook and Instagram at Ignorance is Strength Podcast and on Twitter at The Ignorance Pod.